We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we record this podcast and pay our respects to elders past and present. We recognise their ongoing connection to land, waters and culture. We recognise that sovereignty was never ceded.
The case of Leongatha's Erin Patterson, who was recently convicted of murdering 3 relatives with a deadly mushroom meal, captured headlines around the world.
I'm devastated. I love them.
But did you know an even more prodigious killer lived in the same small Victorian farming community in the 1930s? Join Leongatha journalist Matt Dunn and special guests including author Katherine Kovacic and former Victoria Police Detective Narelle Fraser as they unearth the chilling story of serial killer Arnold Sodeman on Sodeman, the Schoolgirl Strangler. Episode 6. Origin Story.
A very perverse fusion of libido and power needs that's expressed in, sexual gratification and killing.
Who was Arnold Sodeman? In many ways, it's a question that will remain unanswered. Too many years have passed, and the easy tropes that will be used in his defence seem flimsy upon examination. As author Katherine Kovacic would write in her book, The Schoolgirl Strangler, the Sodeman family had been in Australia for some time, with Arnold's grandfather, Ernst Wilhelm Sodeman, a cabinet maker, arriving in September 1883 with his wife Eugenie Matilda and son Karl. The family travelled from the port of Hamburg, departing on July 5th and arriving in the port of Adelaide on September 12th. Karl, Arnold's father, was just 3 years old. The family stayed in Adelaide for 3 years before moving to Sydney, where they lived for 2.5 years. In 1889, they moved to Melbourne, where they would remain. In January 1936, ahead of her grandson's trial, Jeannie Sodeman provided a statement to authorities regarding the family history, hinting that there was something in the blood that caused Sodeman to behave the way he did. She said her brother-in-law, Gustav, had died in a mental asylum after 9 years in and out of hospital. Meanwhile, her husband, Arnold's grandfather, Ernst Sodeman, who was mild-mannered to begin with, ended up becoming violent. Many's the time he caught me by the throat, she said. Indeed, he would later admit to trying to kill her. Contrary to the statement Jeannie would make in 1936, however, hospital records indicate Ernst Sodeman's fits of rage and violence only began after a stroke. Arnold's father, Karl, would also suffer from severe mental health problems, eventually admitted to the Mont Park Hospital for the Insane. Katherine Kovacic, the author of The Schoolgirl Strangler, explains.
So we have a very interesting family history here. So his father was later diagnosed with what was called general paralysis of the insane, but this was specifically linked to syphilis. So this comes on after his divorce, after they've split up, and so make what deductions you will about what this guy does after his wife's gone. He's in Mont Park Hospital for the Insane. He's in poor health generally. But yes, general paralysis of the insane is specifically related to end-stage syphilis. So he's described as demented, he gets lost, he can't have a rational conversation, he's restless at night, he's got poor hygiene. But this is all, and subsequently he dies of pneumonia, but there are obvious brain changes there. But this is not a sort of a familial, this is not a genetic weakness or, anything like that. This is specifically brought on by disease.
It's not the man that Arnold knew as a kid either, is it?
That's right. So this all happens after Arnold's already left home.
Okay. So, I guess we'd assume then that the effects on him, he might be affected by it, but it's certainly not a catalyst for him becoming a serial killer.
Absolutely not. No.
Okay. And what I probably should point out too that talk about, this institution for the insane.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, insane was a word that was kind of bandied round.
Very much so.
Whereas someone would be on a mild medication today, back then they would have been under lock and key.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. Sodeman would run away twice in his teens. On the second occasion, at the age of 16, it was to join the army and fight in World War One. This attempt was thwarted. He would later say his father beat him, but he also bailed him out when he got into trouble. Katherine says Arnold may have been a troubled teenage runaway, but he was far from unloved.
The first runaway was when he was 13, so they were living in the Surrey Hills area then, so quite a nice affluent area of, Melbourne, nice houses.
Mm.
And that was a very, that was almost a non-event. He was back very quickly. So wherever he went, he didn't go far, and home was obviously better. And then the second runaway, I kind of take that one with a grain of salt, because that was 1916, and he ran away to try and enlist in the army. And I think a lot of kids were doing that. He was a pimply 16-year-old, 17-year-old youth, and not going to fool anybody. But kids were fooling the draft admissions people. So
when you think about businesses that are selling through the roof, sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and brilliant marketing. But an often overlooked secret is actually the businesses behind the business, making selling simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Nobody does selling better than Shopify. They're the home of the #1 checkout on the planet, and the not-so-secret Shop Pay that boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts going abandoned and way more sales happening. Businesses that sell more sell on Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout Allbirds and Skims use. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/start selling. All lowercase. Go to shopify.com/start selling to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/start selling.
in that instance, interesting. The parents didn't go looking for him the first time, so either he was back very quickly, or they knew it was kind of a stunt. But the second time they did go to the police and they said he's out there, and they knew he was heading to try and enlist, and they got him before he got to the Broadmeadows camp. So, and I
think you made the point too, which suggests that they weren't terrible parents who were abusive, and they actually cared for his welfare.
Yeah, well, after at one court case, his father put up £50 bail, and Arnold had to put up the other £50. And so £100 in those days, that's, about $12,000 in today's money. And before he was sent to jail for the robbery, his father, pleaded, don't send him to jail. I will take him and his brother to Queensland. We'll start afresh, get him in with the good crowd sort of thing. But the magistrate wasn't having it. So that doesn't sort of speak of a father who's, particularly abusive and violent and horrific. This is someone trying to bail his kid out before it's too late.
While living in Wonthaggi, one of Sodeman's earliest recorded crimes was the forgery of a cheque. He then stole a horse and cart. He would use the money from the forged cheque to buy beer at a hotel. He would take flight and assume the alias of James Hill or A. Thomas. Later, working in a different part of the state, he stole another horse and cart, along with blankets, brush and comb from a boarding house. He then sold the horse and cart for £19, a princely sum in those days. An arrest in Swanston Street, Melbourne, saw him forced to front the Supreme Court, where he was fined £100, half of which was paid by his father. Soon after, he was in trouble for crimes his various aliases had committed, spending a short time in prison. In a description from the prison, it was noted that a woman's face was tattooed on his left upper arm. He also had roses etched around his waist and a ballet girl on his lower right arm. In 1920, using the alias Harry Phillips, he paired up with another criminal to commit an armed robbery, in which he shot a station master twice, one bullet striking the man's finger, the other lodging permanently in his side. The pair left the cash behind, fleeing on bicycles. While Sodeman's companion gave himself up, Arnold disappeared but was later apprehended. 3 years of hard labour in prison would ensue. After those 3 years, the state decided not to let him go but to place him in the McLeod prison farm on French Island in Western Port Bay. He would escape with another prisoner in stolen boats, but instead of landing on the mainland, they found themselves on Phillip Island. It was 17 years before a bridge would be built, and so the pair was trapped. Their capture was easy. Sodeman and his fellow offender would be labelled as incorrigible rogues by a sentencing magistrate. Despite what seemed like a label that might be applied to a Hollywood Brat Pack actor, Sodeman was far from a lovable bad boy, and yet, after another 12 months of incarceration in Pentridge Prison, he was soon married and appeared, at least on paper, to have reformed. Former Victoria Police Detective Narelle Fraser says Sodeman's early successes only made him bolder.
People that start off with petty crimes, it's rare, isn't it, to go from zero to a serial killer in one sitting. But if petty crime isn't nipped in the bud early, I think if you're a certain personality, it can lead to you taking more risks, becoming more confident, starting to socialise with like-minded people. Let's say, learning the tricks of the trade, pushing the envelope more and more. If you don't get caught, it could almost become fun. And, you start to think you're pretty cool, because you're doing stuff you're not supposed to or it's illegal, but then progressing to killing anyone, anything, let alone a child, that is a huge step, as we've both acknowledged.
Yeah.
Huge step. But I think the fact that he got away with it for so long, he just kept pushing his luck, pushing the envelope. And I think he enjoyed it. Maybe, as I said, enjoyed the notoriety.
I think it gave him confidence, and I think when we look at those early offences, there's that degree of cockiness, and again comes back to, just spinning the story that suits the situation. So first of all, he passes the forged cheque, but he wasn't stupid enough to hang around afterwards. By the time a warrant's issued for his arrest, he's 350 kilometres away. So he's already, and that was what age, about 18? So he's already, we're assuming this is his first crime, but, there might have been some petty thefts and things before then. And then when the law catches up with him for that, he said, well, I thought that was all sorted out. My mum paid the fine, she paid back the money. No worries, that it's all just going to go away. And, and then the next thing is, someone tells him he can't take the horse and cart, but he takes it anyway. And then just goes through this series of very blatant, he steals from the room that he's staying in at the guest house. He sells the horse and cart, which is going to be tracked down very quickly. So very, very blatant, very cocky sort of crimes. And then again, he absconds from there, another 300 kilometres back to Melbourne. So he just seems to be extremely confident. And again, this can be sort of quite a psychopathic tendency that, that you're going to be able to spin the story or just walk away, And that's the way he behaves, just as though the law is never going to catch up with him. Mind you, he has changed his name for this series of crimes. He's no longer Arnold Sodeman. He's James Hill at this point. And he signs something else with a different name. He's already thinking about ways to disguise his tracks as well. So
Sodeman will use drinking to explain away much of his bad behaviour. When he describes the murders, the episodes are brief. 1 minute he has his hands around the girl's throat. The next, she's dead. My special guest, Tim Watson-Munro, a criminal psychologist, author and co-host of the true crime podcast Motive and Method with Dr. Xanth Mallet, believes Sodeman was entirely aware of his actions.
Well, he knew what he was doing. He did it on a number of occasions. So it's not as though it's a sort of automatism. More likely he enjoyed what he did.
Too often, Katherine said, he told the story he believed would serve him best.
Hazel's the only one who could potentially have died quite quickly because she already had tubercular lungs. But, you know, even a child to strangle someone, you know, it's one of those sort of television tropes that it happens really quickly, but it actually takes several minutes to strangle someone. So just, you know, he's making a bit of a leap there to say, oh, I just put my hands around her throat and then she was dead. But look, when you look at his entire history, he has that sort of psychopathic trait that he tells you the story that best fits the circumstance, that suits him best. You know, even the little details about, you know, like when he was working at the mines at Wonthaggi and he was working as a clipper. But at one point he says, no, he's an apprentice fitter. And another point he said he was, I can't think of it, what it was with the pit ponies, I can't think of the term. Yeah, so presumably this comes back to whoever he's talking to, he wants to establish a rapport with them. So if they've got something to do with horses, he said, oh yeah, I work with the horses at the Wonthaggi mines, you know, or if it's someone who's an apprentice, whatever, yeah, I'm an apprentice fitter. Yeah, I can do that, you know. So to me, this sort of speaks of that sort of psychopath thing, that it's you know, I don't know what happened, you know, 1 minute we were doing this and the next minute she was dead, you know, and this bit comes back into that, was it, you know, oh, my drinking and blah blah this and I can't remember, and you know, something comes over me.
So what do you think about the drinking then? Do you think that's a trigger? I mean, you kind of suggested in the book that you know, it maybe lowered his inhibitions, so...
Look, the blokes in the pub said, you know, he got a bit stumbly and he, you know, talked a lot more. And I think his brother said in court, well, you know, he couldn't ride a horse when he was drunk. But certainly no one said anything about him becoming violent or aggressive. And his wife never said anything about, yeah, he hit me at home or he'd drink a lot at home and then this would happen. Even though when, you know, she cut ties and she got out of there as soon as she could when she knew the truth. And that would have been well and truly the time if there was something for her to tell, to say, yes, we're in an abusive situation and, you know, I couldn't get out of it, because everyone would have been completely on her side then instead of telling her that she potentially had a psychotic child, you know, and you could be in trouble down the track because of that. They would have all, you know, put their arms around it basically and said, my God, how did you survive all that? But she didn't. So to me, that says that whatever was going on with his drinking, it wasn't anything to do with, you know, it wasn't anything to do with him becoming a killer. Another sort of convenient excuse, really. And also when we think of the little girls, so Mina Griffiths, you know, this man was sitting in the park and he was on public transport and no one said, oh, he was stumbly or he was loud. And kids, you know, Mina came from a Catholic family, but these other kids would probably know, you know, and certainly Hazel Wilson. She's a girl who had a little bit more experience. She was a bit older. She'd been at dancing. If he had a lot of alcohol on his breath, if he was presenting like an inebriated man, she would have had the red flags up. She wouldn't have been standing at her gatepost having a nice chat with this guy, because she would have been thinking, this is an older drunk man. You know? So I don't think there's anything in the alcohol being part of the trigger for his murderous rampages.
Well, he wasn't so drunk that he couldn't do it. Let's put it that way. Alcohol may factor into these crimes. More often these days, serious drugs like ice, you know, methamphetamine and so on can affect judgment and impulse control. It may be that with a bit of booze, he became disinhibited, that when he wasn't drinking, he was better able to control his urges and his fantasies. But clearly he wasn't so intoxicated that he couldn't carry out these terrible crimes. He wasn't incapacitated by alcohol.
I get a little bit sick of these sort of, well, I would call them pathetic excuses. It's a choice. And, well, you know, with an alcoholic or whatever, I think sometimes you don't have a choice, but you know what you're doing to a point. You can't tell me that because he'd had a few drinks, he lost all morals, and like he had enough sense to, when he's, let's say, murdered June, and he said he'd had a skinful. Well, it doesn't matter whether it's a skinful or a few, but he's trying to put some doubt, I think, into people's mind. Oh, it's because of the drink. But he could act very normally going back to the beach. I get a bit sick of those sort of excuses because it's very convenient. But they can still act very normal. Well, yeah, normal after the fact. Yeah, I get a bit sick of it.
Despite this, Narelle doesn't believe that Sodeman was born bad.
And from the start, I just want to make it very clear to the listeners that I have no qualifications whatsoever in counselling, psychiatry. These are purely my thoughts. But
yeah,
I don't believe that you are born bad. I believe that our exposure to certain behaviours that we're exposed to in our younger years, that's where we learn behaviours that we think are normal. And it's not until you start going to school or talking to others and realising that not every family acts in the way that, your own family does. With his brother, I just sort of think so Arnold goes off the rails and his younger brother worked really hard. Yes, absolutely. But every family member, we all have different personalities and we take different paths. And I suppose some people are more susceptible to influence than others. And I still think that Sodeman met some undesirables.
Narelle has a theory that Sodeman's inability to describe the murders is because he couldn't quite face the reality of what he'd done.
I don't know if he can actually voice what actually happened. I think it's so shocking to him. And I do think he would be shocked at what he's done in a way. And I think to actually verbalise what he has done is just too hard for him. And that's why I think he's just, and she's just dead. I mean, that wouldn't happen. She would struggle. Like, I think maybe looking back, he would find that, my God, I can't believe I've done this, but he has, because it's an urge that he can't control. So I tend to think that he just can't verbalise it. It just seems she wouldn't just, and she's dead. It wouldn't happen like that. She'd be gasping. Oh, sorry, but, she would. She'd be gasping for breath. She'd be struggling. She'd be doing all these things. That's probably why he can't verbalise it. It's just too distressing for him.
Because I sort of wondered, like, is he just not willing to take responsibility for what he's done? Or...
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that as well. Yeah. It's like he's trying to blame something or someone else rather than himself. I just think it's so abhorrent that he just can't say it.
So he knows how wrong it is.
Absolutely. Well, yes, of course he does. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that kind of suggests he's not really a sociopath then. Like, he must have some feelings of empathy, I guess.
Yes, I think so. And that also, I believe that shows in his personality with his wife.
Yeah.
He's not, let's say, an animal 100% of the time, or a monster. He does have some feelings, some. Yeah, I believe he does.
Sodeman's paternal grandmother would say there was something in the family's blood. It was a line that may have been used to bolster his insanity defence. Katherine remains sceptical of its truth.
I think there was something in Sodeman, and certainly if you look at sort of psychopaths and people who have lived and worked with psychopaths, they will say that they are born, not made, but they also need to have, there is an environmental element as well for many of them, and that's why you can have someone like his brother, Ernest, who grows up completely normal in the same environment, and then you have Arnold. But as for something in the blood, like a genetic lineage, I don't think so. I think he was just one, just him.
He was just a bad apple.
Yeah.
However he got there, it was hard to deny Sodeman's self-serving nature and lack of empathy for others.
Oh, well, what he did was psychopathic. No doubt about it. He was a psychopath, a serial psychopath.
There was a suggestion that perhaps Sodeman had killed other kids or attempted to kill other kids before Maina.
Yep, that's right.
What happened there?
Well, we had one little girl who, same area, and she was basically accosted by a stranger. She was strangled and she was left on railway tracks, but this was ahead before Mina, and there was like the railway tracks were up an embankment, so if you were standing on the footpath nearby, you wouldn't have been able to see her. But she hadn't been strangled to the point of death, and she regained consciousness and managed to get off the railway tracks, so was able to recount this story. And this was not long before Mina. It was very much in the area where Sodeman was active.
Right.
And it seems to fit in very neatly with his modus operandi.
Oh, wow. So was there anything that actually stopped him from going the whole way with that?
I think maybe she was one of the early ones. She was perhaps the first one, and so she was unconscious. So maybe he thought he'd killed her, presumably. So putting her on the train tracks was to get rid of the body effectively in the suburban area, and so he just didn't realise that he hadn't killed her.
So a certain amount of experimentation, I suppose.
Yeah.
After Sodeman came out of Pentridge and married Bernice, there was a number of years where he was quiet, at least on paper. However, Katherine believes that it was very unlikely that he would not have been offending.
I think he'd be doing stuff if the opportunity presented itself, and I think the haulage business, Geelong to Melbourne, it's almost got criminal enterprise written all over it, doesn't it? How smuggling whatever you want, or moving illicit goods. So you wonder sort of how much was going on there. But I think if the opportunity presents itself, and you happen to have a truck that you're driving up and down to Melbourne, what better way to pick up hitchhikers or get rid of people along the way. So I think that, but at the same time, even psychopaths have periods where they are inactive, and sometimes that has been shown to be family life, that they get busy, they've got a young family, or they've got a new spouse or whatever, and they do take a break from their killing because they're just, the opportunity doesn't present itself.
Narelle wonders, though, whether domesticity was a trigger for Sodeman.
From reading what I have, maybe, like, as he got older, and let's say when he got married, his wife might have been the controlling one in the relationship, and I don't know, maybe he didn't like that. So maybe he thought, look, if I can't control my wife, I might be able to control somebody, a younger female. Look, there is definitely a chink in his personality somewhere to make him want to kill a child. Where that comes from, that's something as I said, I'm not qualified to answer. But to me, it's about power and control. And particularly if you're a master manipulator, as I think it's fairly clear Sodeman was, I still believe his killing was about power. Maybe he felt belittled, maybe it was walked over in his marriage, in general day-to-day life, and he sought that feeling of power that he didn't have in his marriage. So to overcome that feeling of I don't know, helplessness or control from his wife, and to prove that to himself that he's no walkover, he sought power with others, and that happened to be children. I don't know. Like, why a female? Maybe a bit of something about his mum. I don't know. Generally, females aren't as strong as mum. I know this is I'm generalising here, but we're not.
Yeah.
We're not as strong as a man. So maybe because a female was easier to control or to fight, it's so much easier to overpower or control a child than it is an adult. Hence, again, why I think he chose children to kill rather than adults.
Oh, no, I think the way you've described it speaks to control, doesn't it? And he's enjoying the pleasure. His pleasure is seeing their suffering. So it's sadistic behaviour. They surely know what's ahead of them. They would be terrified. And it sounds as though it's ritualistic in terms of with each one stuffing their mouths and so on. So it's all about power and control, as I previously mentioned.
For all intents and purposes, the Sodemans seem to be living a very normal family life, welcoming daughter Joan into the world on October 11, 1928. When her father was hanged on June 2, 1936, Joan was not yet 8. Still, Sodeman and his wife Bernice seemed happy together. It raises the question, did Sodeman love his wife and child? When you read the letters that he wrote to Bernice, it's easy to become confused. Was this a monster mimicking human behaviour, or did he actually love? Sodeman even had a pet name for his wife, Doll, as he would write soon after his confession.
Dear Doll, I've confessed my mania and will pay for my sins. Please try and forget me. Arnold.
He would also go on to say not to waste any money on his defence. Bernice was in a state of disbelief, looking for reassurance that the charges levelled against her husband were not true.
Dear Arnold, I am writing to ask you to do one thing for me, and that is to tell me the absolute truth. If you have done this thing, don't let me be battling in the dark. I know in your right mind you could never have hurt anything, but you must know, and only you. I try hard to convince myself it is a mistake, so play fair and tell me the truth. It will not make the least bit of difference, as my sympathy will always be with you. But you must realise that if those turns come on you before, then they will do so again unless you have treatment, and you would only be a worry to yourself. You know how dearly we loved our girlie, and you must know that others love theirs just as much. Just think how we would have felt if it had been our little one. Your love for your own kitty should help you realise those things.
So do you reckon he loved, did he love his family?
This is a difficult question. I think psychopaths don't experience, and I'm calling him a psychopath. We can't definitively say that he was. They're not emotional in the way that other people were. I think it's telling later on that his big thing to his wife is not saying, "Oh, I didn't kill them," or "I'm sorry I killed them." It's like, well, I didn't, sexually abuse these girls. That was the big thing that he wanted to get across to his wife. So that's for him. That's the key thing. As I said, we've got no evidence. Certainly, his wife never said that he hit or abused her. So there must have been some sort of feeling, but maybe that feeling was just, this is the good cover, the stable, reliable family man sort of thing. So I think he did have some feeling for them, but not in perhaps the normal way we would expect a husband and father to feel for their family.
Yeah. Well, I guess, it's not a trope, is it? They mimic the behaviour that they think they're supposed to
absolutely
display.
Yep.
And it allows them to do the stuff that they really
blend
want to do.
That's it, blend into society, yes.
Yeah.
They can, but it's a peculiar love. I've had a lot of very bad clients over the years who have killed people on more than one occasion, and some of them have had partners that have been with them for 20 or 30 years, and they have a different relationship with them. So, it really depends how you define love. They have a strong attachment. Whether they love in the way that we understand love, it's a moot point, I think. Certainly with this guy, who knows? But if he wrote to her, it's all part of the script. He probably needed her at some level. But that doesn't detract from who he was.
I asked him whether serial killers can also be family men.
Well, I don't know that they're, strange as it sounds, but I don't know that they're necessarily mutually exclusive concepts. They can be devoted to their family. They switch off their bad behaviour. They compartmentalise what they're doing. And so they can be available as fathers and husbands, go to the kids' sporting games. They blend in with their community. I've had, read about examples, and I've probably assessed one or two where, they've killed a number of people, and the community's always surprised because he seemed like such a good bloke. He rolled up his sleeves on sausage sizzle nights, he did all this sort of stuff. And yet the other side of him, where he's out killing, he's just as devoted as a killer as he is to being a family man. So that's with some people. Others, because they have other psychological issues, they may in fact be violent at home. They may be heavy drinkers at home, but they don't go to the point of killing their families. You look at the Claremont killer, it was a couple of decades before they finally got him. He murdered 3 people, 3 women. A serial killer by definition. He was only convicted of 2 because they couldn't find the 3rd cadaver. He refused to say where it was. From my understanding, is beyond what he was doing. He blended into the community like a chameleon, and that's not unusual. They live double lives, and this gets back to bad, not mad. Crazy people, they'll always telegraph their craziness in some way that's picked up by others. But when people are truly psychopathic, when they're in charge of their behaviour, they know what they're doing, they have mens rea, they understand the consequences of their behaviour, they just put on a different mask when they're home with the family. And there's been many, many examples of this, in recent times and old times, where they blend in, and people who know them best are often the ones that express the most surprise when they're caught and convicted, because they didn't see it.
One question that played on my mind was, did Bernice know? Reading the letters, she appeared not to. But did she just not want to acknowledge the truth?
It's not uncommon for partners, spouses of really bad criminals, whether they be murderers, hitmen, bank robbers, rapists, to turn a blind eye to their bad behaviour. So as long as they're not built into, their bad behaviour, they tolerate it, and or they're too frightened to leave the relationship. So it's better to say nothing than to get involved in a dispute with them, because that could lead to them becoming victims as well. So sometimes they genuinely love the person. Sometimes they don't leave because of fear of the person. And so they tolerate it, or they diminish what they're doing. They sort of, they accept that they've been bad, but they don't accept the full gravamen of what they've done in terms of killing people or raping people and so on. So each kind of situation is quite different, but certainly from my experience over 4 decades, it's not unusual for spouses and partners of psychopaths to stick around for various reasons.
And what would have happened if not for William and Henry Money and a more organised police force? Would Sodeman have ever stopped killing?
And of course, the main game beyond the killing game is not to be caught. So having committed the crime, they want to evade detection at all costs. The stereotype serial killer, once they get a taste for it, they keep going. Look at the Golden State killer in California. He was a copper, killed a lot of people. They eventually got him on DNA evidence. He would have kept going. It's just part of their script. Once they elevate to that point, it's often preceded by other serious crimes like rape. It's all about sexual stuff, serial killing generally. It's exciting for them. There's a very perverse fusion of libido and power needs that's expressed in, sexual gratification and killing. That's part of it. And they don't stop, generally speaking. There's been cases in Victoria, the so-called Mr. Cruel, who abducted a number of girls. There were many more before Carmen Chan, but Carmen Chan died, tragically died, killed, murdered. There was some debate about whether it was him or other people, but my sense of it is that it was him, and yet he stopped. It all stopped. He disappeared. There were various theories about that. Did he die? Was he in jail? Did he leave the jurisdiction? Because a number of them do. When it gets a bit hot in the yard, they find another yard to play in and so on. But in terms of your question, the typical career path for these people is they keep going until they're caught. Well, they can be stopped. You put them in jail or execute them. But short of those sort of sanctions, do they have some sort of road to Damascus moment, an epiphany where they wake up one day and say, oh, this is all terribly bad and I'll stop doing it and I will surrender myself to the police to be confined or get treatment? Tell it to the Marines. That doesn't happen. So they don't just stop, or they become too ill or infirm to actually carry out their behaviours. But once they're on a roll, it keeps snowballing from my observations and reading.
My proof listener and editorial assistant is A. Dunn. Thanks too to Mark Drury for his introductory voiceover and theme music. Thanks to Dan Laurie for playing the part of Sodeman, and Grace Griffith for playing the part of Bernice. And thanks to my wonderful guests, Katherine Kovacic, Narelle Fraser and Tim Watson-Munro. Next week is the final episode of Sodeman. Join us for the trial and the execution. See you next week.